would you say if even a woman were saying there would be 4 women to every 1 man in Isaiah 4 because they just wanted the protection of that man. So the women were saying, we'll marry you. We don't even want nothing from you. We just want the banner of your name for protection. Would you say then that the men wouldn't
I
have
would
more than
still
one
say
wife?
that they
Violated what? The what law?
God.
What law?
God's law for monogamy.
What law? Where's the law?
That man should not commit adultery.
But what is adultery?
To cheat on your wife.
No, to sleep with another man's wife.
That is not the bro. Come on, dog.
Go to the law. Here's the thing, right?
That is not the only thing that God said is adultery.
Here's the thing, right? I haven't been chuckling, right? Unless we was actually playing. But every time I give you a verse, right? I think you make it funny, but it's actually not, right? So do you want to read the law of adultery, or you want to assume that you know the law of adultery?
Let's read the law of adultery.
All right. You know where it is?
No, you can tell me.
Okay. It does say that.
So go to Leviticus 20:10. And then go to Isaiah 4 just so you can see how the men, it was like, I think it's 7 a woman to 1 man.
So is this going to be another prescription by God, or is this a description of the society at the time?
No, this is so you know the Torah are the commandments, right?
I'm just asking.
Okay, so just for edification purposes, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is where you find the laws of God. So when you're reading those books, that's the Torah. Those are the 613 commandments that are in the Bible.
Fair enough. All right.
Okay.
If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, the wife say of his neighbor, both the man and the woman, the adulterers and the adulteress must be put to death. If a man has sex with his father's wife, he has violated his father. Both the man and the woman must be put to death. If a man has sex with his daughter-in-law, both of the man must be put to death. What they have done and perverse, and they are responsible for their own deaths. If a man has sex with a man, as one does with a woman, both of them have done with what is abhorrent. They must be put to death. They are responsible for their own deaths. If a man marries both a woman and her mother, that's wicked. All three, and then must be burned at the stake, purging the wickedness from the community. If a man has sex with an animal, must be put to death. If a woman has sex with an animal, you must be killed. Kill both the woman and the animal. They must be put to death, and they are responsible for their deaths. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of their...
You saw how, and when you read the adultery verse, what did it specify with the woman? Sleeping with another man's wife, right? Specifically. Right. So if you sleep with another man's wife, that's adultery. If you sleep with a woman who is not betrothed or not married to a man, because you can have multiple wives and you have to consummate it with sex, that wouldn't be adultery. You see? So pursuant to Exodus 22:16, just so you know that sex is highly equivalent to marriage in the Bible, then you would have to concede that point.
So you're saying that if they're saying
I'm
that...
not saying anything. I'm giving you the verses specifically.
No, I'm asking you. So if you're saying that, because you said that sex is essentially marriage, right?
Oh, sorry. I'm not being rude. I have to correct you because you're saying I'm saying. I'm not saying anything.
Well, I'm asking. So are you saying that because you said that sex is essentially marriage? That's what you just said, right?
Pursuant to Exodus 22:16, though, if you look it up. In 17.
There's a reason why y'all focus solely on Old Testament every time.
If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the marriage price and marry her. If her father absolutely refuses to give her away, the man must still pay the marriage price for the virgin. Don't let the sorceress live. Anyone who has sex.
So you see how when he has sex with her, right? She's endowed to be his wife unless the father refuses.
Does that? So what does that have to do with him being able to have sex with another woman?
Well, because adultery, right? The men can have more than one wife. That's why in the adultery verse that you just read, it says another man's wife. If you have sex with another man's wife, that's adultery. But you can have multiple wives, which means you would have to be able to have sex with multiple women without committing a sin.
So, okay, all right. So if I could be fair, all right, hold on, wait. If I could be fair, all right, hold on, wait. If I can be fair, then. So what we're saying is that the only other that it would be completely okay that you're saying that it's okay for him to marry multiple women. So are we also so he's okay for him to marry multiple women as long as he don't mess with another man's wife?
Yeah, you cannot mess with another man's wife. You shouldn't even go to the bar with another man's
true.
wife.
That's the Old Testament.
What
Hamp, where you want me to send this cape to?
No, he was saying that it was in Exodus, right? You said Exodus?
Yeah.
Exodus 22 and 10.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Because I think the Old Testament argument, I don't know why that continues to be said, right? Because if Jesus said none of the law is done away with, then he's talking about the Mosaic law. And pursuant to 1 John 2 and 4, if you say you know God and you don't keep his commandments, you're a liar and the truth is not in you. What commandments would he be talking about?
Polygamy was not a law in it of itself. What it was a cultural norm. Those two things are very different. And then the reason they say that in regards to the New Testament was, like I said before, once Jesus became the ultimate sacrifice, there was certain laws that were no longer needed because he made that ultimate sacrifice. And then he began to spell out new law.
What he expected from us.
Specifically
Hamp,
says,
what does the Bible say about women teaching men about the Bible?
specifically says it used the word new law.
Male oversight.
If you say new law, then the assumption is that there was a previous law that now is no longer in place once you say new.
Well, who said new? Only the people said new. The prophets don't say new.
At the end of the day, like I stated,
Let me
maybe
show y'all this real quick.
Y'all gonna come
Bruiser,
to
let me show y'all this.
two different.
Luke 24 and 44, just to give y'all a little bit of breathing room for what it is you're trying to say. Go to Luke 24 and 44. You'll get
No.
Jesus being specific.
Don't get them no breathing room because they set up here.
I know I'm right.
I already told y'all.
Let them live in everything they say.
I already told you before. You're gonna reach two different avenues. You're gonna have a disagreement between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and whether the Old Testament was fulfilled by Jesus Christ in the New Testament. You're gonna run into contradictions if you don't agree with that.
We interpret.
It's gonna be a matter. It's gonna be a matter of your discernment, who you're teaching, or who your teachings are coming from, or how you studying the Bible, and you're not gonna be able to yield on this conversation. I've been honest, like I said before.
I think y'all yielded. Y'all just beating a dead horse.
I haven't
definitely have a completely
anything.
different interpretation of what he got. I believe that God said it the way that I interpreted it. I don't.
He hasn't given you his interpretation. He's reading the verses. You're
right, and that's because he's not giving an interpretation doesn't mean that. So if his interpretation is that God says you can have multiple wives and he prescribes it, I'm saying that I think it's under a specific criteria.
It's you have to stop doing that, right? And I'm asking, right? So I'm giving you the verses so you can read them directly. Nobody said it was a law because that would be prescription, right? The commandments say what they say. There's no law against having multiple wives, right? It tells you what's immoral in terms of sex and how you wed a woman. So you cannot say that the men can't because the Most High didn't say they couldn't, right? But he's not speaking directly against polygamy and he's not speaking directly against monogamy, right? That's why I asked you to go to Timothy 3, where it says specifically in the New Testament, right? Because I hear you guys saying that a lot, where it says for a bishop, Paul recommends that a bishop specifically has one wife. He says it clearly for a bishop to have one wife because he understands that men have multiple wives. So he says for a bishop or a deacon, you should have one wife because you have to preside over the congregation. You got to, you know what I mean? So they don't want them to be distracted. But I asked you to read that so you can understand it, how men have multiple wives, and it's fine. It's just not for everybody.
I think the positive thing to take away from this is that we're finally having a conversation where people are speaking their specific principles. The whole reason why we even got into the concept of having principles is so that we can know how to deal with people based on the standards they live by. So I look at this as a positive. The worst thing you can do is get in interaction or a relationship with somebody who don't have any principles to hold them accountable to, period. So big ups to DJ Hamp for having principles to start with. I feel like because you have that, you're able to articulate that to who you deal with, so they can hold you accountable to those, or back check you on that, to make sure that they're making the right decision when they choose to get in this situation with you. You get what I'm saying?
Hamp, it was Hebrews 8:13.
Versus somebody who don't even have any principles, period.
I agree.
It was Hebrews 8:13.
For
what we were talking about, where he specifically said new. So it says, in that he saith, a new covenant he hath made, the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away.
100%. We were talking about the law though.
I think she was giving you context on how two different interpretations could get confusing or contradiction if you're reading it the way mistaken is reading and understood. It would prove the point that the old was out with the old and with the new, just to bring it out. But then I believe your interpretation and how you understand is totally different than that. That's why I kept saying earlier we was gonna come to an issue where you're gonna agree. Oh, go ahead, my bad.
Well, just real quick, because when you're reading it, right, if she starts at verse Hebrews 8 and starts at verse 8 specifically, right, it said it's not clear even that the old is washed away, right? That's eschatology, so end time prophecy that you're reading there, right?
Hebrews 8.
If you like start at, you can, I know you got the 13, but if you like start around 8 or so. So I know those verses, right? Jeremiah 31 and 31 will help back that up as well. But also remember, it says when you're under the new covenant, you won't have to study the scriptures. It'll be written on your heart, and you won't have to teach your neighbor. But we all know that we have to study, and we have to teach each other, right? So right there, how can a new covenant have come to pass if we have to do those two things still?
Say that because I know the scripture says study, so that I don't know how to say it exactly, like word for verbatim, but basically, actually Danielle has said this earlier about study. So basically, that you'll know, so thy heart be true.
Yes, ma'am. Mistaken. What it says is under the new covenant, you won't. Everything will be written on your mind, your heart. It says, right. Heart means mind in the Bible when you read it. Right. And then it says we won't have to teach each other anymore. But we know right here, right now, we literally have to teach each other. So that's why the new covenant, we haven't met all the markers for the new covenant. Now, I think that you guys are spot on when you said Jesus came to give us grace because we couldn't keep the old law perfectly. Right. Except for the fact that John the Baptist's parents in the so-called New Testament kept the old law perfectly. If you read the book of Luke and start chapter 1.
Well, let me say this about the Old Testament, and I'll just take myself out of it because I believe the old, and I want to speak to what you just said. I believe the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, I'm gonna call it covenant. I believe the Old Covenant is no longer in effect because the records, not because it was not able to be done perfectly. It's just simply because the records to keep the Levitical priesthood and sacrifices, that specifically was destroyed when the temple was destroyed. And if they can't, it's impossible to even practice that. Without those records, no one can rightfully serve as a priest, or continue to hold, the sacrificial system with the sacrificing animals and stuff. And I believe this is why Jesus Christ became our eternal high priest, replacing the old system by offering himself as the final and perfect sacrifice for sin. Through him, we now live under the new covenant, not the old. And you're correct. We're covered by grace now, not law or sacrifice. We're covered by grace.
You're right. We can't sacrifice because the temple is destroyed. But 1 John 5 and 3, right, is the New Testament. And it says verbatim, if you love me, the me is God, keep my commandments. So I just think that we have to thoroughly read to understand what's happening. Now, grace is simply this. JR always pays his phone bill late, right? So they give him a grace period, but he still got to pay that motherfucker. So just like in Hebrews 10 and 26, if you sin willfully, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. So you can't just go sinning, go to church, go sin, say, pray for. No, eventually your ass gonna be grass. You can't ask for the same forgiveness over and over. That's why Jesus came to give us that grace, so we have an opportunity to repent and not repeat it, right? And so, in order to, and sin is breaking the law, right? The law is the Mosaic law.
So are you, so with the, so are you saying that we're still under the old covenant law, despite Jesus establishing the new covenant? If that's the case, how do you deal with the fact that what did you read earlier, mistaken? Hebrew 8:13, which I think it said the old covenant is right. So what?
Further
go
on
ahead.
those same verses, what I was going to say is even before I got to where I was at on Hebrew verse 13, going backwards, it does say even more. It says, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. So again,
exactly. So if those records would never do, and I think, and one thing I'm big on is God being omnipresent. I mean, he's out of time. He's infinity, negative infinity or infinity. These things are seen. These things were predicted, but not by us, but by God. So God knew that all of these things would happen. But what I want to do is just harp back on the fact that you're going to run into a lot of scriptures, and it's key to have a concordian and proper discernment. I invited Sweeney to have a conversation with me and my bishop, the bishop that used to go, the church I used to attend 8 years ago. And he was able to explain a lot of this stuff. And you might not agree, but again, we're going to get to a point where we're going to be mixed up. We're not going to be able to agree. And what I would say is that may God have grace on all of us. If we are, let's say for a fact, we're falling in the wrong, or maybe you, that God will have grace upon us for not having a clear understanding. Because I think the way that the wording is very hard to be able to look at a fluent message without running into a contradiction somewhere.
That's extremely ironic considering the last 3 weeks y'all been talking complete absolute.
Now concerning the things wherefore you wrote unto it, it is good for a man to not touch a woman.
You have changed energy.
Nevertheless,
I don't have no changed energy. You misinterpreting what I'm saying, dude. I'm talking about, I just explained that the old covenant and the new I've explained there's going to be a disagreement between the old how you study the old covenant and the new covenant, and whether you believe those records being destroyed was justification for the New Testament being developed. And then if you believe that the reason for the New Testament being developed puts away the Old Testament, then you would focus on everything in the new. But then we're finding contradictions, and it's just a mess.
No,
drop a 1 in the chat if they change their energy, specifically Sweetie and Darwin over the last.
I haven't changed my energy on nothing. Everything I said before this still stands.